Hello, and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, the critical thinker at large, coming at you for another stupendous, fantastic, and awesome episode of Amazing Greatness here on YouTube and on Stitcher, iTunes, and Google Play for those who want to hear audio only. This week we're going to do a little something a little different, but I think you guys are going to see how this relates to everything else that my channel goes into, and that is we're going to interview a person who is actually in the reserves now, but has been an active duty soldier since 1994. He's a friend of mine. His name is Gary LeLeux. Now, do I have that pronunciation right?
Absolutely. You got it.
Excellent. Okay, good. And Gary's been a long-term watcher and follower of my channel and great supporter, and somebody that I've actually wanted to do this interview with for quite a while. I've had so many questions about things, and I like to talk to people who have been in it, who have had direct experience with stuff as often as I can. You know, sometimes I have a hard time getting folks on my show who are rather prestigious because I'm still a small show, but I'm working on it. And, but you know, the people who are on the ground sometimes have the most amazing observations and details and ability to talk about what's going on. And that is the case here. So Gary, welcome to my show.
Hey, thank you, Chris. I really appreciate it, man. Thank you for this opportunity.
Absolutely. And now this is not your first rodeo in terms of showing up on the public airwaves. You're on radio as well.
Yeah, I was working for 92.5 KVPI. And that's the time we did an interview over the air that one time. And by the way, the people loved it. And and I spent a couple years into that since I've gotten into the reserves, but I have since moved into journalism. I worked as a staff writer and reporter for the local newspaper here in town. So
awesome, man. Awesome. Yeah. Cool. Well, let's get into it. I've had, you know, I've got so many questions and things I want to ask you. That first off, though, let's give the folks out there some idea of who you are, where you've been, because you've got 2 pages of resume here of soldier experience.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm not going to just read the whole thing beginning to end, but you joined in '94.
Yeah, that's right.
And go ahead and give a summary version of like where you've been and what you've done.
Okay. Well, in 1994. I had finished school a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, high school. And I was just looking for a new avenue in life. So I actually walked into the recruiter's office wanting to join the Marine Corps, but they were busy. They didn't have time to talk to me. And I didn't know the difference at the time. So as I walked out of the office, the Army guys stopped me and said, "Hey, man, where are you going?" And I said, "Well, you guys are too busy to see me. I kind of wanted to sign up, you know, or see what's going on. You know, what kind of deal can you guys give me?" And he said, "Oh, man, well, come on in our office and we'll square you away." And
I'll bet he did.
They popped in a VCR tape of some guys jumping out of airplanes, and they gave me the brochure, and they said, "We'll be back with you in a minute." And I was like, okay, man. And I was sold, and I was ready to sign up. And they said, "And you being a great guy, we'll even give you a $1,000 bonus."
What?
So I signed up. I was like, "What, man? I'm 18 years old. This is it." So
big money. Yep. Oh yeah.
So
all right, and where'd you go?
Yeah. So I went to Fort Benning, Georgia, as a recruit, as a basic trainee. Finished my training there, and then I went to Fort Hood, Texas, and I was in an infantry unit, which is like the ground pounders. And the actual definition, according to regulation, as to what we do is to find, fix, close with, and destroy the enemy in close personal combat with using the judicious application of controlled violence.
Okay, nice definition there.
That's our technical definition for what
exactly
goes on the resume. Yeah.
Let me interrupt for just a second, because I realized I forgot to do something, and that is that we need to be super, super clear about something on my show here today, and that is that Gary is not here in any way, shape, or form as a representative of or spokesperson for any of the armed services. Everything we are going to talk about today is 100% his experience and opinion, and is in no way, shape, or form to be interpreted by anybody as policy statements or public relations statements on the part of the armed forces themselves. So just had to throw that disclaimer out there.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. But yeah, once I got to Fort Hood, Texas, I was a standard infantryman there, and I liked the job. It grew on me. It gave you a sense of accomplishment. I made a little rank, not much. I wasn't in charge of anything, but I made a couple stripes. And then my reenlistment time came up, and I reenlisted for the big time. I wanted to be a paratrooper. I wanted to jump out of planes. I really wanted to do that stuff. I was motivated. I was young, my early 20s. I reenlisted, got to airborne school, and got assigned to the 101st Airborne at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And that's I don't know if you're familiar with it, but those are the Screaming Eagles. Those guys, they did a movie about that back in 2000, the Band of Brothers miniseries that Tom Hanks produced. And that's the unit. That's the famed 101st Airborne. And it was a privilege to serve there. But little did I know, within that year of getting there, the world would change. I mean, September 11th happened. And after that, any illusions I had of this just being a game were out the window. It got real, you know. And,
Yeah, I'll bet shit got real fast when those towers went down. Now, you were assigned to Afghanistan?
Yeah. My first deployment, right after the towers fell, the whole post was locked down. I mean, it was crazy. They took out bomb-sniffing dogs to the front gate. They cut off all the pay phones. The cell phone signals were disrupted. I mean, it was crazy. We were locked down on post. We couldn't go home and see our families, nothing, because it was all new and it was happening by the moment. And so after that tension kind of decreased a little bit, then the mission started coming down. The orders started coming down from Washington D.C. to our chain of command, and they started coming up with a plan for us and how we were going to go and meet our enemies on the battlefield. And Afghanistan, if you remember right, at the end of 2001, all the way in 2002, that was the area of engagement. So we ramped up. We flew to Uzbekistan. We staged there because that was an old Soviet republic at one time. It's an independent country now. And then there was a base there. We staged there for a little while until we got the order to actually go and bum rush, into Afghanistan. We were with the Marine Corps on one side. They had us on the other. We were all in helicopters as we invaded the country. Basically, I'm oversimplifying it, but they took a left and went to Kabul, and we took a right and went down to Kandahar and secured that city there. And we stayed there for about a year. And a major engagement during that year time was called Operation Anaconda. That was the first major land engagement. After the bombing of Tora Bora at the end of 2001, the remnants of Al-Qaeda scattered into the mountains. And right around March 2002, they started to coalesce again. What was left started to collect up in this village. The village's name is Surkhan Keel. It's in the Gardez region of Afghanistan. They started coalescing around there. Intelligence confirmed that that's where they were. There were about 300 of them. And then they sent us into the fight to extinguish what was supposedly the last of the Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. But that didn't happen. I mean,
no. We've since learned, I believe, timing-wise, that at that same time or around that time, Osama bin Laden was hiding out in Pakistan.
Yeah. Well, actually, we can hear him making the escape. His communication with his guys during that particular engagement, Operation Anaconda, it was a major engagement, supposed to last 3 days, turned into 11. Intelligence had the number of enemy personnel all wrong. It went from 300 to 1,300. So our force was wholly inadequate. Our Afghani allies tipped off the Al-Qaeda as to our coming in at what time. Our landing zones were compromised. There was a big fight, and it was a, excuse the pun, but a come to Jesus meeting with yourself, so to speak. It was a serious engagement, and the Afghani allies were supposed to block the remnants of Al-Qaeda from getting into Pakistan, but they didn't do that. They let them walk right into Pakistan, and you can hear them on the two-way radios talking to one another, and they went straight through that defensive line that Afghanis were supposed to set up, and bin Laden went into hiding for about another 10 years.
That's right.
And Afghanistan turned into something that I guess our political leadership at the time had no anticipation of it turning into. You know what I mean? It turned into we were supposed to be in there and gone, destroy them in a couple of weeks, and we're out of there. And that didn't happen. We're still there.
Exactly. And that really does highlight the and I'm not going to try to be all ultra critical here of
No, yeah,
our
yeah.
government. Hindsight is always 2020, and we can see things backwards that we could never see moving forwards. And so I don't want to armchair quarterback anything here, but I do want to point out that lack of adequate intelligence has been our bugbear in a number of these countries over there.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You know,
Perfect example. That map I have on the wall right there, that is a Russian map. That's the map I had to use in Afghanistan because the CIA considered it such a crappy place before 2001. It was, they didn't map it. They didn't digitize it. And so we had no maps going into the fight. So what we had to do was take these plastic sheets of paper called an overlay, write the English translations on it, tape it over that map. And that's what we used in the fight, trying to navigating through the mountains at 10,000 feet elevation.
And I guess, did anybody at the time, I'm just going to fire questions at you as they occur to me. Did anybody at the time think to themselves, Russia just got their asses handed to them year after year after year in this exact same place? And say what you will about Russia, they certainly don't have any shortage of people and machinery to throw at things.
Yeah.
Did anybody think to themselves, maybe we might want to reconsider what we're doing here? Obviously not your call as a soldier on the ground, but was there even talk about that?
I think the chain of command had hesitations about committing large-scale ground forces initially, until the situation was such that it was inescapable. They had to send some ground forces in there. Because, airplanes can only do so much. Helicopters can only do so much. Indirect fire, which is like artillery, can only do so much. You have to put troops on the ground to subdue the population, take over a high-value target, whatever. You've got to have troops on the ground. And I think they put it off as much as they could until it was undeniable that they had to do something. And I think those lessons from what the Russians learned were incorporated. But then again, they're the Russians.
Right.
The civilian population, the Afghan civilian population, thought we were Russians until, like one of my best friends, he's a black guy. They looked at him and they're like, "Wait, you're not Russian?" Like, no, we're not. We're Americans. They don't know the difference.
Well, of course. How would they?
Yeah. Yeah. One warlord can have a fight on one side of the mountain, and on the other side, the next tribe or whatever can know nothing of what's going on at all.
Right. Very, very tribal.
19th century technology type of basis,
Yeah, exactly. And yet it's interesting how effective those old school communication techniques and tribal systems can be against a modern, technologically advanced army.
Exactly. And we had to almost dumb down our ability to fight the enemy. Because all those gizmos don't do you any good if you're going up a guy who's going to throw rocks at you till you die. You know what I mean? So you got to change the way you fight.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the good thing about the American army versus the Russian army. We have an ability to adapt. Everybody in the chain of command down to the private knows the plan. In a Russian army, doesn't happen. Privates, enlisted people, they don't get the plan. It's the officer that has the plan. And if he gets shot, oh, well, the mission fails. They'll just send a whole other unit in there.
Right. Yeah. Different culture, different way of thinking about how to implement or utilize resources. Okay, fair enough. So you're on the ground there. Then again, and let's get back to the broad strokes. How long were you there, and then what happened after?
Okay, I redeployed around September, October 2001, back to the States, or 2002. I'm sorry, back to the States. So that put me a year in Afghanistan. I got back to the States. We had our little block leave for like 35, 45 days, if I remember right. And halfway through my leave, it was canceled. I got ordered to go back to base. And I'm like, what now? And at this point, I'm totally outside of the news cycle. For a whole year in 2001, 2002, it's not like now where the news constantly hits your phone and you're constantly inundated with information. It wasn't like that then. I had no idea that Iraq was turning into something. And when we got back from leave, when we got called back into leave, we got the briefing that, look, we're about to redeploy back to Kuwait because Saddam Hussein's acting up and we might have to go in there. And we're like, what? Like, really? Don't you know we've got guys in Afghanistan right now? And we're like, yeah. But, that's where the next fight is. And I think that contributed to Al-Qaeda and the Taliban having a resurgence because we took our attention off of Afghanistan. And because, you know, you got to have a full spectrum mission whenever you go to war nowadays. You got to not only defeat the enemy, but you got to provide infrastructure. You got to provide guidance and leadership. You got to, you know, to the civilian population, you got to, you know, you got to provide those things that are after war or other than war to make sure the population doesn't revert back to what it was before you got there. So they took their eye off of that, and that's exactly what happened. They fell back into that whole cycle of constant infighting and warlords fighting one another and all that stuff. So we got back to Kuwait. We redeployed from the States back to Kuwait, and then in March of 2003, we invaded Iraq.
All right, and you were boots on the ground for that as well.
Yep.
Damn.
We the minute Saddam Hussein didn't comply with the instructions, the UN instructions to have his country inspected, the minute the last no was uttered, we got the word to invade, and we were right there on the line. We were staged in Kuwait, ready to bum rush across the line the minute we got the word, and that's what happened. And we pushed north. We went all the way up to, my unit went all the way up to Syria. We started in Kuwait, and we went all the way up through the whole country, hopping along, riding in helicopters, securing certain areas along the way until we got up to Syria and what they call it, the Sinjar province. So, and
wow.
I stayed there a year, and then came back home. Got a couple of years later, I got an assignment to Fort Benning to be an instructor. And I did that only to get into the reserves after that in 2007, 2008. And then,
okay.
Yeah.
And you've been active reserve since then.
Yeah. Once I got into the reserves, I put my bags down at my new unit, and they said, well, get ready, you're going back to Iraq. So I went back to Iraq for a whole nother year in 2010. And that was you could tell the political climate was changing then in 2010. Obama had got elected in 2008. So in 2010, he's thinking about winding it down. I mean, the speeches are coming out about closing Iraq, closing shop. And so the dignitaries were coming in to ensure that, you know, like David Petraeus, he was working for the CIA then. We pulled security for that guy, like the perimeter security for whenever he would come in and do inspections. And Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, she had come through, and the mission was changing then, and we were shutting down Iraq. Even though Afghanistan is still going, we're shutting down Iraq because that was one of Obama's promises at the time, to get out of Iraq. So we actually shut the gate on that place. So, I mean, looking at it in full spectrum, I invaded in 2003, and then I was in a unit that, by coincidence, shut it down, you know, as we were leaving.
Right. Yeah, you've been in some interesting places by pure coincidence, you know?
Yep, absolutely, a victim of circumstance. But I can say this, that what was accomplished in Iraq was absolutely nothing. I mean, it was the same hellhole it was before we left. I mean, that's my opinion. I mean, I could be wrong. I'm not an intelligence analyst, but just from what I witnessed.
And I want to ask you about that. I want to let's go ahead and finish your tour here, your career, and then we'll go back and take a look at this, because I have questions about Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yeah, sure.
So after you left Iraq, at that point, just in the reserves.
Yep. I get back to the States after I did my tour there, and I got put into the reserve status, which is not every day, but it's part-time now. I'm still an active service member, but not doing it every day. So I took the college option, and I went to LSU, and I got a degree in political science with a minor in history. And I began working for the radio station, and then here at the newspaper now. Still, the whole time, I'm committed to my reserve obligation. And in between all that, you have hurricanes and natural disasters. That is another mission of ours, being a reservist. So I was involved in the hurricane rescue effort, Hurricane Harvey. I've gone to Germany a couple times for 30 days at a lick to go and train allied nations over there in Estonia and Poland and places like that. So I did some training missions over there, but it brings me to here right now talking to you. That's how my service record unfolded.
Excellent. Okay, cool, man. And just in case, you know, I should say this because it's true. You know, I really do appreciate your service.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that. And it means a lot coming from somebody like yourself, man. It does.
Cool.
You know, to hear that, it means a lot, because it's not necessarily for me, but it's for those young guys that I took over there, you know, and some of them didn't come back, you know, and I live with that. That's the cross I bear as a leader who's personally responsible for the accomplishment or failure of your unit. You carry that with you, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm
I
sure.
thank you very much.
Yeah, no, you're welcome, man. Thank you. Okay, let's go into a few details. Actually, before we even hit any of this, I've gotta hit you with this question. And this is a
Yeah,
completely
sure.
ridiculous one,
No,
considering all the heavy duty stuff we're probably going to get into. But um, I never get to ask anybody about this. So you're an actual soldier who's in actual combat multiple times. You are
yeah,
familiar with, I'm sure, a number of different weapons and weapon
yep,
systems and the and all of the things that go into being in the military. You're definitely
yeah,
a career soldier.
yeah,
So when you see movies and TV
yeah.
shows, right, on
Uh-huh.
this stuff, what's your what do you
Yeah.
how are they do they
I know
get
what's
it
going.
right? Do they ever get it right?
Actually, Band of Brothers and Black Hawk Down and Lone Survivor are the only three movies I've seen that actually get it right. They have paid attention to detail and put the effort into getting the little minutia right. Because it's easy to film somebody shooting a weapon and wearing camouflage and speaking the lines that we never talk to one another in real life. But when they do it like Lone Survivor, Black Hawk Down, they took the time to get the minutia right, like the way their helmets looked, the sound of an automatic weapon. It has a very distinct sound. How the Black Hawks hover at us, you know, it's just those little minutia that was like, wow, man, it blew me out of my socks. I was like, that is correct.
Interesting. So when did you see like Zero Dark 30 or
Yeah, that's another one that got the minutia right, but I think the storyline screwed up. I don't think
yeah.
I think they combined the characters into that one female that actually did the heavy lifting. I think it spanned a bunch of people that actually did the heavy lifting to go and find or pinpoint Bin Laden. I don't think it was that simple. I guess for cinematic purposes, they condensed all of those many people into that one female that got that done. But yeah, they got the minutia right. You know, some of the what the SEALs said and what they wore and the type of helicopter they flew in. Yeah, they got that right. But like the storyline just threw me off.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
Actually.
I don't think it was that simple. You know what I mean?
No. And when you read, my biggest exposure to this has been Lawrence Wright's book, which he won the Pulitzer for, The Looming Tower.
Yes. Oh my God, man! I watched the series on Hulu. Another one blew me out of my socks because I remember this happening before the war started. I was a soldier when the towers were hit, when the first World Trade Center was struck. I remember that, and then it culminated into the September 11th attack, and then, of course, like we talked about, my life changed dramatically. And
Yeah,
Lawrence Wright
exactly.
did an excellent job.
Yeah, and the book is even better because you get a lot more behind the scenes of what was happening to inspire Osama bin Laden to the kind of thinking that and mindset that he had.
Yeah.
And you see Lawrence Wright actually traces it all the way back to the 50s in Egypt and
Yeah.
radical Islamic fundamental writers and speakers who were pushing this very, very intense, obviously dogmatic, obviously cultic
Yeah.
party line and an interpretation of Islamic scriptures. And it was
Hmm.
very, at the time, it was a bit unconventional in some respects and certainly more violent than it needed to be. And they were very, very, very down on the West. And that whole attitude filtered down to
Yeah.
the Osama bin Laden, others in the bin Laden family, et cetera. And of course, you see attitudes like this rife throughout the Middle East and even in our allies, like in Saudi Arabia. So you have to
Yeah.
wonder, why are we allied with some of these folks? And of course, those
Oh,
questions lead
yeah.
down, you
Oh
know,
man, I can expound on this for days. But I've come to learn one thing: there is nothing worse than a fanatic with money. With I mean, sick, god awful money. There's nothing worse than that. I
that's
mean,
right.
these workers, these all field workers overseas, I've seen them working in flip flops with no hard hat for 50 cents a day, and then they fall off and they go get somebody else to fill his spot. And these sheiks don't care, man. And and oil is still $18 or or $81 a barrel or whatever it is. It's sick. It's just sick money, you know. And then they have the leisure and the time to propagate this fanaticism, and then it takes that one guy who's got all the money and is fanatical. I mean, look at David Miscavige. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
You know,
exactly. And he's a relatively tiny pipsqueak comparative to.
But imagine if he was on the world stage.
Oh, exactly. You know It'd be the same. That's right.
Imagine if he had the ecclesiastical level of the Pope. I mean, he would have. What? How did it say on Batman? Some people just want to watch the world burn.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. So yeah, pretty ugly personality type, and when they get in charge, and unfortunately, there's plenty of people out there who were happy to throw money in Bin Laden's direction, and when he got his chance to hit the reset button and get into Pakistan with his people and build back up his base, that's of course what he started doing, and America kind of turned its head in another direction when that, and there were all kinds of other factors. It's not simple. I'm not trying to make it simple, but it was just a very unfortunate series of circumstances and events.
Oh God, yeah. And in Iraq, when we had taken our attention off of Afghanistan and went into Iraq, the biggest mistake, and it's on the record as it being one of the biggest mistakes. Well, two biggest mistakes. You disbanded the officer corps of the old Iraqi army because and you barred anybody who was a Ba'ath Party member from serving in the new model army we were building. So here you have.
And why was that significant? What was the Ba'ath Party?
The Ba'ath Party was the party of Saddam Hussein. And just like Hitler did in Germany in World War II, and just like Stalin did in the 30s through the 50s until he died, their respective parties, in order to be a government official, in order to have some kind of semblance of trust, you must join the Communist or National Socialist Party. Well, that version in Iraq is the Ba'ath Party. And that's the party that Saddam Hussein came to power with. So any government official had to be a card-carrying Ba'ath member. Now, when we got in there, and Brennan got in there, and he was the coalition chief dude or whatever, he banned anybody with any type of affiliation with the Ba'ath Party from serving in the government at all. So now you eliminated all the experience, because not every card-carrying Ba'athist is a psychopathic murderer like Saddam Hussein and his family, okay? And then you disbanded the entire officer corps of the old army, okay? Now you don't have any experience. You got to build that from the ground up. And now you have a bunch of unemployed military-age males who are pissed off because the electricity is not on and they're out of a job. They may have been waving American flags when you got there, but when reality set in, they got to feed their family. So now they're pissed. So here comes Al-Qaeda sneaking into the country, because they wasn't there before we got there, despite what they said on the news and propagated as our reason to go there. They come in there after the fact. They paying. I mean, we made contact with one guy in Baghdad one time, and this guy, I mean, he was wounded, okay? And us being Americans, we went to assess the enemy that was just trying to kill us, that we negotiated. We're trying to provide him aid to get him patched up. And in perfect English, he said, man, it's nothing personal. They come and paid me 10 grand. I got to feed my family. They told me to take pop shots at you. You know, that's what you don't hear on the news. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And that was the reality on the ground. So Al-Qaeda moved in. They started paying all these military age males that know how to use weapons to take pop shot at Americans to attrit us enough to cause us to leave, which eventually happened.
Right, because guerrilla warfare can be extremely effective in those circumstances. Because
you're trying to. You're an American example.
Right.
When we won a revolution, it was pretty freaking effective.
Exactly. All right, let's go back to in time to Afghanistan a little bit. What's it like there?
There was a CIA analyst one time I was watching on TV that said, in Afghanistan, like walking through the city streets, let's say Kandahar, is like if you can put yourself in the bar scene of Star Wars. I mean, it's very rowdy. People from every walk of life, speaking 10,000 different languages. All of them have weapons, can't trust a single soul, and you got to watch your back at all times. That's
Wow, and
kind of
that's
like,
in the middle. That's in the middle of the civilized areas.
yeah, yeah. In the mountains, in the remote areas, uh, take that and factor that times 10, because now you got isolation as a factor. Now you got customs that are thousands of years old that they're not going to change just because you show up. You know, there's a reason why they say Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires, because I mean those people are very set in their ways, and they're very patriotic, if not tribal, and they will fight to the death. They can shoot an AK-47 pretty accurately from on the back of a horse while it's in full gallop. You know, so
Wow, that's not an
they
easy skill.
no. So it's an enemy to be respected, and you to trust no one.
Interesting. What is the technology situation over there?
Well, when I got there, it was non-existent. It was the most heavily landmined nation in the world because the Russians had just got out of there less than 10 years prior to us arriving. And I remember when I would go call home, there was this big satellite dish, and there was a line. You had to wait in a big green phone connected to the satellite dish, and there was a relay when you got on it, and you only had 5 minutes. From what I understand now, there's Skype, there's internet, there's Wi-Fi, but I think it's around the bases, around the populated areas. I don't think they have that capability out in the mountains. But if that's the case, then it would be night and day. Like there is a place where there's no running water, to where they hunt their food every day, to living on the side of a mountain, to let's say you go into Kandahar and the technology jumps 200 years into the future. You know,
Yeah, exactly.
you've been there for so
Keep,
long.
keeping in mind that you weren't supposed to trust anybody, and so
Yeah.
I'm gonna go out on a limb and say you didn't make a lot of friends with locals.
Well, it's I would say you could classify it as a political friendship. You know what I mean? Like you have friends in Washington D.C. that you can go to for favors, but they're not really your friend. You're not gonna have them come over to the house. You know what I mean? And hang out. That's the kind of friends you made in that type of situation. You cozied up to the local tribal chiefs. You gave them boatloads of money at times, whatever it took to win their favor, to win their loyalty. And we knew it was just superficial, but at least we're making an effort to get them back to our side, to where we can start molding them into some kind of responsible government. You know, that was the objective.
Okay, got it. And the government was supposed to operate out of
Kabul.
Kabul.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, Kabul. And the government's authority just extended, I would say, maybe 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers outside of Kabul. And then it would quickly be non-existent when you got into the countryside, because communication is a problem. The constant warfare is a problem. You know, the government, and then plus their troops are unreliable. You know, fanaticism has been the word of the day for the last 20 years over there. So it's hard to find recruits that you could build up a security service with that'll be loyal to the government, that'll appreciate the training and effectively carry it out. You know, I'm sure they made headroads into that, but at the time I was there, it just didn't happen, because you couldn't trust them. They were just fanaticized. I mean, all of them. You know, every person that we would meet could be a potential enemy. They could have the full intention of trying to kill you, because they're that, for the lack of a better term, they're brainwashed. You know, that's the way they think. That's the way, and they use that as the justification for their behavior.
And it's tribal.
Yeah.
So
Very.
you go out in the country, and it's a good point you said there, because I was going to ask about that, about, you know, how far out does the government's reach effectively go? Because if you you find out, I think, and tell me what you think about this, but it seems to me that you learn very quickly that these old adages actually have some truth to them in situations like that. We've civilized to a point in the West where we have the time and luxury to have arguments about offensive words. In a
Yeah.
place like Afghanistan, nobody gives a shit about any of that. It
No.
is scraping out an existence in a very, very hard country to live in, that
Yeah.
is the graveyard of empires, that has been
Yeah.
invaded countless times. I guess I'm guessing, I want you to tell me what you think.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the warlords out there, these tribal leaders who lead these bands of people over whatever geography they're claiming ownership to,
Yeah.
they seem to me to be the effective, quote unquote, government for their region.
Yeah.
And whatever fealty they pay or are bribed into by the
Uh-huh.
established government is as effective as that government is out there.
Exactly. That government is as effective as the highest paid warlord.
Right.
Pretty much.
Yeah, exactly. Because that is the government's extension of its
Yeah.
ability to enforce its will through force.
Yeah, you got that term where like he's an asshole, but he's my asshole.
Right.
Well, that's the philosophy.
And that must be the balancing act that it's sort of, you get the idea of spinning plates, you know, on the spikes, right? And you have to spin the plate and keep it going. Then you got to do another one and another one and another one. And you get the idea that the guys who are heading up the government in Afghanistan, I'm talking about the native leaders, the people who were born there, who actually are the government, have to play that game with all of these regional people.
You're right. Because you got Pashtuns and you got the Tajiks, and you got all different types of culturally ethnical differences, stark differences between the different tribes that inhabit that area. It's the crossroads of the world. So you got the Uzbeks there, Tajiks, they speak Farsi, and then some speak Pashtun. It's crazy. So you gotta have somebody that's going to run for an elected office that's be able to juggle all of that and still produce something effective, which I think, given the circumstance and what those leaders are faced with, they have thrown in their lap. I think they're doing a pretty decent job, you know?
Well, all things considered, I think so too, given the circumstances of the situation. And let's not forget now, we pile on top of this whole picture. Like if we were not involved in any way, if India was not involved in any way, if Russia wasn't involved in any way, Saudi, Iraq, et cetera, if none of these guys were poking their noses into this, hornet's nest that we call Afghanistan, it would be bad enough trying to deal with this and move it up to the 21st century as it is.
Yes.
But then you start piling on all these external influences and issues where we go in there because we're looking, I guess, initially, and again, confirm this for me, but we went in there because we were absolutely sure that's where bin Laden was.
Yeah, and he was, and that was a casus belli, as they say. That was the reason to go to war. That was, in fact, the first time ever in the history of NATO that clause number 5, an attack on one is considered an attack on all, was activated, was for September 11th. That's why the world showed up there, and because we were that without, it was a no shit scenario. He was in there. His tentacles, his money was in there. We're going to go get it. We're going to flush it out. And of course, you're left with the what's left of a governmental structure there once you clean all of that out or make it scared and go run it off.
Well, exactly. The other factor being that this was unconventional to any other situation that America had ever had to deal with that I can recall, because we were not going after another country. We weren't declaring war against the nation of Afghanistan, nor were we declaring war against Syria, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran. We were going after an individual who was countryless, but that was kind of his power because he could go anywhere.
That was his ability to hide and hide in plain sight, because he had no passport. His citizenship was revoked by Saudi Arabia. He got kicked out of Sudan. He got kicked out of, I think, another country in Africa. He was responsible for the Black Hawk Down incident.
Oh, Somalia. I think he was down in Somalia.
That was a test run. He bought all the weapons there, just to see and make the Americans bleed. They might run. And sure enough, we did. Once that Black Hawk Down incident, that emboldened them, actually.
That's right.
To carry on. And if you notice, like we were talking about Lawrence Wright and those incidents leading up to September 11th, they were all escalatory. Each one was worse than the one before.
That's right. That's right. And I'll correct myself. I don't think it was Somalia. I think it was Ethiopia that he had gone into.
Yeah, he probably was hiding in Ethiopia, but the Black Hawk Down incident was in Somalia.
No, of course. Yes. Related to, but not directly brought about by Osama bin Laden.
To keep him at a safe distance.
Yeah, exactly. Because he was all about influence peddling. He was about taking down the West. And he executed a strategy that was something that Hubbard actually talked about, that the Sea Org was executing when they were out on the ocean, which was this General Fabian strategy.
It was Fabian.
Show up, attack, disappear. Nobody knows where you are. That way they can't hit you.
Yep.
and it led us around the Middle East, by the nose for a number of years, and we made
Right.
all kinds of mistakes as a result of that.
You're right. And a lot of opportunities were wasted because there was I guess a political sense that you didn't want to come across as being too brutal. It was the 90s, man. I mean, there was no war going on. Bill Clinton was president. We had a surplus, and he was getting some on the side. That was the things that we were worried about. You know what I mean? So the last thing we were concerned with was some training camp in Afghanistan. Where's that at? Until it became very real for us the next millennium.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately that whole thing was described quite well in the book, Looming Tower. So I'm not going to try to reiterate it all here, but getting back to your personal experience now. So what else can you tell us about Afghanistan and your experience there? Like to Americans over here who look at that place like, oh, they're just a bunch of towel heads, they're a bunch of idiots. They just write it off with these labels.
Well, those labels have some truth to it. Not to say that they're all idiots, but they're very misinformed. When we got there, being an American soldier, you're cutting edge of 21st century. You got the gear, the protective helmet, glasses, weapon system. I mean, you're looking like something out of a science fiction movie. And to those people that under the Taliban, they couldn't have radio, they couldn't watch a movie, they couldn't have newspapers. Women weren't allowed to read. I mean, it was crazy. So when we got there and we started, moving on these certain villages, of course, we would take prisoners. And this one example I'm about to give you pretty much encapsulates what we're talking about. This one guy we got, he was a suspected insurgent. He was shooting at us from a certain building. We got him. He was intact. He wasn't shot or nothing, but we moved on him and we were able to subdue him. I had a private with me. At this time, I was the rank of sergeant. I had a private with me who was going to be my scribe to write down everything that I was going to search this guy to make sure that he had no intelligence on him, no triggers on him that could set off a body bomb and kill a bunch of people, and whatnot. So, are you familiar with like those little pin lights that you could attach to your keychain? It's got the infrared. You can look for your keys at night or the hole to the.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, you're familiar with that.
99 cents. They're 99 cents at the dollar store. Yeah.
Exactly. I had one of those because it was in the middle of the night, and I was going to check him from head to toe, open his mouth, make sure he had no triggers in there, check his clothes. So I passed that pin light all the way down his boots, and I told the private, I said, he's got no what we call PIR, primary intelligence requirements on him. No explosives. We're taking him to intelligence at this time. So he wrote down the time. I took this guy to intelligence. I looked at my watch, the little pin light, and the bad guy, he's sitting there looking at me, and I told the private my time. So we take him to the intelligence tent. I turn him over to the intelligence spooks, and I walk out. My job's done. About a half hour later, that agent comes out laughing. And I'm like, hey, man, what's going on? How come you're not talking to that guy in there? He was like, dude, it was easy. He sounded like the canary. And I'm like, what? I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, he thought you scanned his brain with that pin light and put the information in your watch. And if he was going to lie, I was going to beat him.
Oh, wow.
That is the mentality that they operate on.
Wow. So that is
they have a totally
one example of many that you are.
Exactly. So you can put yourself in a mind frame like that's how they see it. That's how they saw Americans. They thought we're descending from the sky with all this firepower. We look like robots. Oh my God. I mean, the sky's the limit as to what your imagination can say, what we're, really are,
Right. So we really need to have a reality check on, if they just got some cell phones and Starbucks, everything would be okay.
Exactly.
This is a very gradual evolution we have to push in there if we should even be there at all. And I'm starting to really wonder about the wisdom of that.
I was always taught that the way a war ends is just as important as the reason why it started. Those things are not linear. They change throughout the entire. I mean, we've been there 18 years. The reasons why we went in are not the reasons why we're there now. I mean, in between all of that, you have You have circumstances that have changed, things that as a soldier, I discovered the real reasons why we should be there. It's not for the Statue of Liberty and internet and free market, but when I saw like in a certain village that we had secured one time, the Taliban had just left. I mean, there were women in their full burqas, those heavy duty gray ones, come out of their homes, got on their knees and started wailing, crying, wailing, because they were overjoyed that we were there, because they could come out of their house and not have to fear to be beat with an iron rod for not being in the company of their husband or their male relative. I mean, can you imagine?
Wow.
You know, that's
And they
just,
were actually happy that you
yeah,
were there.
they were overjoyed because they knew it was like their personal deliverance. I mean, little examples like that, it's just, it blows your mind. It'll give you a lump in your throat, and you're talking to the interpreter like, what are they doing? And they said they're very happy. They're so happy because you're here, because they know they can, listen to the radio, read a newspaper, walk outside of their homes with all of that crap on their head, you know,
Wow.
things like that made you reinforce your belief as to why you were really there, you know.
Right. It must be weird, to say the least. And we'll go over this in more detail later, I think, when I have some other things to ask you about. But just to comment
Mhm.
on this, it must be weird to come back here after seeing that kind of thing for an extended period of time. You were not over there for short periods of time. This wasn't a
No, no,
tourist trip for you. You
no.
were in the shit for a long
Yep,
time.
yep,
Come back here and see Nike hijabs and people talking
yeah,
about, how wonderful these things are when you
yeah,
have literally with your own two eyes watched these oppressed women who have been
yeah,
oppressed their entire life,
yeah, yeah. Like,
crying in
I,
joy that
I
you
mean,
are there. And
the oppression was so sick, was so outside of my belief structure of what I was taught my whole life. It was so far out there that I had to actually ask myself, man, am I awake? Is this for real? Am I actually seeing this? And it was. And yeah, so you come back, you rotate back to the world, and you see these things, and you're like, I just shrug my shoulders, like these people have no idea what they're talking about. You know, they don't have a clue. You know,
no,
and
and it's unfortunate that our media
yeah,
is not doing the job that it
yeah,
should in informing on this
it,
stuff.
you're right.
Yeah,
And just
okay.
the other opposite, like in Iraq, that was a different spectrum of enemy, because when you were in Iraq, you were dealing with a population that was educated, that it was a socialist country, because the Ba'ath Party is a socialist party. So they couldn't find jobs, whatever, but university education was free. They didn't have jobs for them to fulfill, but they were smart, very educated people. That's where civilization began. I've seen the remnants of what was the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, outside of Baghdad. I mean, that's where, all those ancient books, that's the Genesis, So these people are not dumb or uneducated in any way. They really, and they appreciated our presence to a degree. But what I found, the biggest difference was that it was the political system before we got there that was evil. It wasn't
Right.
Saddam Hussein didn't tolerate any of that fanatical Muslim crap. He was a politician in the Stalinist sense, 110%. He was he was a Hitlerite, a Stalinist, a mob boss, all rolled into one. And that kind of pain and that kind of depravity was on a totally different spectrum than what you saw in Afghanistan. Those guys, I think that's a they were that was three different shades of evil, on a different level, because they used politics as their vehicle. They used the government as their vehicle. Like he built palaces. I mean, the palaces that Saddam Hussein built in his country were so many and grotesque. There was just his people are starving in Afghanistan with all these sanctions that were in place since the 80s, and he still finds money to build palaces, And one palace was for his generals. I personally share, I got pictures of it. It's a big pit that you walk up to, and in this pit, you have these little cages that dot, around the circumference of the pit at the bottom. And what they would do is they would go to the North Iraqi provinces, generals, and they would round up like Christians or people of Christian heritage, and they would drag them back to that palace, and they would have hungry jackals on chains in the pit, and they would throw these people into the pit, and then they would bet money on how fast the person could get torn apart.
Wow.
Yeah.
Talk about some Christian persecution.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, it wasn't because it was a religious-based persecution. It was a political-based persecution, because in order to be in the political structure of Iraq, you had to be a Sunni Muslim. So, and Christians were a minority. So, like any minority in a system that is very top-heavy, whether you're Christian or not, whatever the label is, you're going to get scooped up and picked on. Whether you're Jewish, whether you were a Christian, or whether you're a Jew in Nazi Germany, or the Cossacks in the Soviet Union during Stalinist times, whatever the label is, if you're the minority, you're getting handled. You're not. That's the internal enemy that these dictators use to justify their existence.
Yeah, it's interesting because Saddam Hussein, like you just mentioned, fundamentalist Islamic, radicals, he wasn't interested in any of that. He was more on the secular military side, but he used the religion and the religious angle to his advantage to hold and to gain and then maintain power.
Yep.
And I guess he just sort of fed the red meat to his Sunni masses that he had in his country, because that's what Iraq was or is. Is it still that way?
Well, all the strife you see now is because when we went in there and destroyed the infrastructure, and everybody who worked in the government or had a decent job had to be a Sunni and a Ba'ath Party member, or a Ba'ath Party member. So we eliminated that. So the other big population there are the Shia Muslims. So the strife you see now is the Shias in power having payback, because they have been the actual majority. The Sunnis were the minority, but now they're in control, and they have all our modern weapons that we left there, and they're using that with vengeance on the Sunnis as payback, as a group. That's what you see. That's the genesis of the fight that you see going on there now.
Hey everyone, a quick word here about the Great Courses Plus, one of my favorite online educational services, which you can take advantage of right now. Have you ever heard the phrase, "You don't know what you don't know"? Well, the Great Courses Plus is the perfect place to help fill in those gaps. There are thousands of lectures on virtually any topic you can think of. Even those you might not think of, but once you see them, you'll be like, "What? I want to do that." And they're not put together by amateurs, but instead by top professionals and professors. You can take courses on the human brain, cultures of the world, physics in our universe, or even learn to meditate or how to cook. And the Great Courses Plus app makes it easy to watch or listen anytime, anywhere. This month, I want to recommend Strategic Thinking Skills. Did you know that there are ways you can train your brain so you really can make more sense of this crazy world? It isn't easy, but it's really valuable and something you should look into. Healthy questioning and carrying a strategic masquerade can help you to prevent future mistakes or the disintegration of ideas. Right now, and for a limited time only, my listeners can get an entire month for free. Sign up now through my exclusive URL, thegreatcoursesplus.com/critical. That's thegreatcoursesplus.com/critical. Do it today. I'm sure you'll be glad you did. Interesting. How does that, from your experience on the ground there, and I'm glad we went from Afghanistan to Iraq here, because again, so many questions. So we have Iran right next to Iraq, and Iran and Saudi, I guess, would be considered the major powers in the Middle East at this point, since we've taken Iraq off the board. And left a bit, like you just mentioned, a bit of a chaotic hellhole there. What did you see of or hear of Iran's presence while you were on the ground out there?
They were making inroads. You see, whenever Al-Maliki, the first prime minister of Iraq in the new government that we stood up before we left, he was financed and has Iranian ties because he's a Shia and the Iranians are Shias. But to backtrack a little bit, when we got in there and eliminated that whole military structure, we got rid of that whole Saddam Republican Guard military and all those affiliated with it. Like I was telling you, you had all those unemployed military age males. You see, that's where ISIS came from because Al Qaeda morphed into this ISIS monster. You see what I mean? Because it was the Sunnis trying to have a resurgence against the Shia infrastructure that was set in place after we had eliminated it. So those Sunnis that were in the Ba'ath Party, that were in the military, in that infrastructure, fled to Al Qaeda with that military experience, and of course, a new leader came to the fore, and it got morphed into Al Qaeda to the 10th power, and that's ISIS. So, and they had at their disposal American-made hardware, because those Shias that were in charge of the government, when they made contact, a lot of times they would drop their weapons and run, and abandon their vehicles. So they were in Abrams tanks, they were in Humvees, they had M4 rifles. I mean, the best on the market, and that's what made ISIS so lethal.
Is this the reason that you hear that old thing about Obama was the one who made ISIS or something like that? I mean, I thought that was a ridiculous meme when I first heard that, but this is sort of the backstory of that.
Yeah, I guess that's where. I guess so.
But this is all pre-Obama, so that's again kind of a silly thing to say.
Exactly, because I mean, W. Bush got us in there. His neocons that he had surrounding him advised him, Donald Rumsfeld, that other guy,
Cheney.
They were the like that Billy Crystal guy. They're all neocons. They have a certain philosophy. It's different than a moderate conservative that you might meet, like myself. I tend to go right, but I'm pretty much in the center. Almost like a Reaganite kind of conservative, fiscally responsible, large milk, that kind of thing. Those are not. They're big spenders, and they have a world domination worldview. That's a neocon, I've been taught. And they advised Bush, look, Saddam Hussein was trying to kill your daddy. He didn't finish the job in 91. There's these tentative links to Al Qaeda, which didn't exist, and chemical weapons. The world is on our side. We've got to go now. I think that's how it's oversimplified, but that's how that went down.
I think you're exactly right.
And we got in there, and they expected us to liberate the country and leave. They had no forward plan. It was David Petraeus that had to come in there with a troop surge and a plan called the COIN, counterinsurgency, to deal with the threat that we were just having handed to us because, we didn't have a plan going in there with that,
Yeah, exactly. This is where the rubber meets the road on the real problems of a civilian political oversight of a military operation or a military force, right? As you are going to run into stuff like this because the presidential term is 4 years. No guarantee the guy's going to get reelected. Even if he does, it's only 8. And when you look at long-term invasion and extrication from a national, from another sovereign nation, you're looking at years and years of commitment, and because of the changing tides of politics and policies, a stable State Department would sort of keep things smooth, but the State Department doesn't appear to be a very stable place.
No, it doesn't. They come up with a template, whereas the Department of Defense, if it turns into a military operation, hammers out the fine details, and sometimes those details aren't what the civilians want to hear. When I was in Iraq in 2010, we as military personnel wasn't necessarily being targeted anymore. They were targeting the Iraqis that were trying to stand up and train, and we were trying to tell the political leadership, not me personally, but the chain of command, was trying to tell them, look, I understand you want to get out of here, but we're here. Regardless of how you see it or how you feel about us coming here, we're here. Now this broken baby is our responsibility. We've got to fix it. To leave too early will cause a major problem. And of course, we closed up shop. I mean, and granted, I mean, Obama wanted to keep his promise. I mean, you know, I voted for the guy. You know, I don't, as a soldier, I don't want to be perpetually fighting a war forever. I mean, I go to war to prevent people younger than me. I don't have any kids, but if I were, to prevent them from going to war. I don't want a perpetual conflict that would see him grow up. Like, I got soldiers under my charge right now that were born on September 11th. They're 18 now, and they're ready to fight. They don't even know what September 11th is. The whole, you know what I mean? It just blows my mind sometimes how twisted this whole thing got, you know. But that's a different subject for another time. But
fair enough.
I'm just saying that, you know, the political leadership sometimes don't want to hear it, and they'll go against the advice of their military leaders there. Schwarzkopf once said, God rest his soul, he said, the reason why we didn't go in Iraq and handle it in 91 during a Desert Storm was because we're going to be like a dinosaur carpet. And nobody took his advice. He got out of the Army. He thought he was just blustering. Times have changed, moved on. But he was right. We were a dinosaur in a tar pit.
Yeah, exactly. Man, interesting. Very, very interesting. All right, let's talk a little bit more about some of this, because I'm curious about how you see things. You know, again, soldier on the ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you were not at the top of the chain of command, but you've moved up a bit over the years, right? So you have a little bit more view than, you know.
I have what they call a tactical influence. As officers get in, they may be tactical at the beginning, but they move through the ranks and become, they enter a strategic level. They look at the big picture. As an enlisted man that makes his way up the ranks, you become a professional soldier from the tactical perspective. So, I mean, I'm in charge of about 50 soldiers now. I have a lot of experience. I'm tactically sound. You know, I don't have to always reference the manuals or be questioning myself when I'm on maneuvers. If I was to go into a hot spot today, I'm quite confident I know how to get there, accomplish the objective, and get out. So that's the biggest difference.
Got it. And what sort of you mentioned when we were when you gave me your breakdown here, and in some posts and stuff, you've mentioned how you have been shot out of the sky, you know, stuck in situations that absolutely were not at all what was predicted for, which of course you want to try to predict for, but how can you with, you know, an infinity of possibilities? What's the worst situation you've been in?
Oh man, that operation I was telling you about, Operation Anaconda, my first actual combat mission while I was in Afghanistan in 2001, 2002. That mission, like I was telling you, they got it all wrong. Intelligence confirmed allegedly there was 300 enemy personnel. It ended up being 1,300. We as Americans are doctrinally taught to go into a fight with a 3-to-1 ratio. For every soldier they have, we're sending 3. For every piece of equipment we're sending 3 to ensure that we win the fight. It's called fire superiority, and that's the only way you get that in a fight is if you use that 1-to-3 doctrinal instruction. If you use what you're taught into the fight, it's guaranteed to win. Only if your assessment of the bad guys is correct, because 300 turned into 1,300. Now we're fighting a one-on-one fight in a piece of terrain and 10,000 feet elevation where oxygen is so thin that helicopters have a hard time chopping. An enemy that was briefed by our alleged allies to meet us on our landing zones. We had no element of surprise. Our ability to speedily get to the landing zone was compromised, and our violence of action was compromised because we confronted an enemy on a 1-to-1 basis. You know, that it's always in threes. I was taught that the 3 key elements to winning a fight is speed, security, and violence of action. Any one of those are compromised, you're not winning the fight. So all 3 went down in that fight. And that 3-day operation turned into 11 days. And we didn't have the water for it. Our chow was low. I mean, our units were scattered. It was in terrain that was, you know, every breath you take at sea level, you got to take 3 up there at that elevation. So that was the worst I've seen. I mean, I've seen helicopters take an RPG round to the rotor blade and spin out. You know, that was the worst type of situation you could. I think Sean Naylor wrote a book about it. It's called Not a Good Day to Die. If you ever have the time, it's kind of Army terminology heavy, but it's a good book. It explains it all.
Wow. How, just because I'm curious, how'd you get out of there? I mean, 11 goddamn days under fire. Jesus.
Yeah. we were down on the 11th day. I didn't know the 12th day, if the 12th day was going to show up and I was going to be out of ammunition. Eventually, in that area, we stopped, looked, and listened. After every engagement, we tried to move toward the sound of gunfire. You know, you try to use your battlefield instincts. I mean, your FM radios are not working because the signal's bouncing everywhere. You don't have a GPS signal because that was pretty much before that time. I mean, we had GPS, but they weren't the most reliable thing. And we were running low on water. We had to take snow from the mountains and put it in our canteens and sit on it to warm it up so we can drink. We were running low on chow. Our ammo was dangerously low. So we just moved to the sound of gunfire, and we took one day at a time. And I was just praying to God that the next day we would bump into a friendly unit. And as luck would have it, on that 11th day, our main battalion headquarters, our regimental headquarters, had consolidated enough to send out search parties for the units that weren't accounted for. And as we were maneuvering through this engagement area, we ran into one of those search parties that said, hey, you know, gave the signals back and forth. We're Americans. Okay, look, disengage from where you're at. You're going to move 15 clicks on this azimuth. That's where the friendlies are. What did you see? What did you have to engage along your, you know, show me on the map where you've been and what you've been doing, that kind of thing, so they can get the intelligence and pass it up.
Wow. It must take an incredible force of will to be thrust into a situation of worst possible circumstances like that. I mean, the only thing you, I guess, had going for you was you weren't physically wounded.
No.
You've got, you know, whoever you have around you, and you've got crashed helicopters, low supplies, etc. It must take an incredible force of will to, one, stay with the mission, but I mean, at the same time, where are you going to go?
Yeah.
And two, persevere and keep going. And then when you say something to me, I am not a professional soldier. I would never even pretend to have that mindset. You know, you say something to me about how you're going to keep moving towards the enemy fire, and I just think to myself, my God.
Yeah, it's a bad situation when the safest place is towards the sound of gunfire. Because I mean, once we realized that we were we were dropped off in a compromised position, we were making contact the minute we got off the birds, and we had no friendlies around us because each helicopter can carry only a certain amount of people. You have to all of a sudden the mission is out the window. Now you're in survivability mode. Now you're gonna use your terrain, your military decision-making process, assess the terrain, and move to the direction that you think would be the best to provide cover and concealment for your guys, the best safety that can be asked for in a situation like that, because you don't want to needlessly compromise your guys, but yet you want to get to a position where you can be a force multiplier and link up with friendly units, because the more the better.
Right. Wow. Well, you know, it must have been an amazing amount of luck and skill to have been able to survive that.
More luck. Yeah, more luck, man.
Yeah, but those skills, I mean, they count for something, you know.
I mean, that military discipline really came in. That training really took over in ways that I never would have thought. You know, like that muscle memory thing that the military beats into your head really paid off. You know, when you made contact with the enemy, the things you say, the way you move, all that training kicked in. And that's what I attribute that overwhelming firepower, a motivated team, and assets. When you see the United States Air Force, after you link up with your friendly unit, and you finally see an officer there that has comms with the U.S. Air Force, and you see that American-made B-52 coming over that engagement area, about to lay a lot of hurt and discontent on what was trying to kill you, it's a satisfying feeling. I'm not trying to be a masochist or nothing, but as a soldier, that's a good sight.
Absolutely it is. And I don't doubt it for a second. I mean, we're talking about saviors here. And you make a very good point, and something I would like to highlight for a second. You know, the muscle memory, the training takes over. People have asked me many times, and I've had very deep conversations with people about whether military training or boot camp is a kind of cult indoctrination. And I have maintained this whole time, without having that experience myself, and only experiencing it secondhand or through movies or what I've read of the experience, I have always maintained that it is not a destructive cult, and it is not a cult mentality that is fomented there. It is a discipline that is being instilled,
Yeah.
and these are survival skills because of the
Yeah.
situations you guys are gonna be put into. Now, I'm not saying that
Exactly.
this is a perfect system by any stretch of the
No,
imagination.
no, no, no. Yeah. I
I
mean,
think I go ahead.
the assets. I say assets, but the way they get in your head to break you down, to discipline you, I guess can resemble that. But where those two stray is the fact that once your time is up, you're done. You get out. You can leave. Um, your seniors, your sergeants in charge, or your officers in charge, are don't have, unlike popular belief, don't have unbridled authority. They are accountable to you, the soldier they are leading, because they are there for you. The minute they fail in that mission to take care of you as a soldier, to provide you with the needs, the training to accomplish your mission, it will reflect on them and it will be relieved. So that's where the differences are. But I say in the beginning, yeah, I mean, I guess there's only one human way to get inside somebody's head. I mean, that's the reason why they shave your head. It's not, it's a sanitary thing, but it's also, it mentally reduces you to equal. There's no
Exactly.
faddish hairstyles there.
That's right.
Everybody's bald and beautiful, man. You're a 9-digit number in a salad suit, and that's it.
That's right. Nobody
That's
cares
what you
about your
start from.
color or your
Nope.
background or even your
No.
education.
Nope.
That's
You could be a rocket surgeon from India, but you join the army, and that's the standard.
That's right.
And if you don't
That's
meet the
right.
standard, they'll kick you out. I mean, I've seen people get kicked out of basic training.
Oh, of course,
They fail to adapt.
as it should be. Exactly.
Yep.
Because of the situation, exactly because of the situation you found yourself in on your
Yeah.
first combat mission.
Yep.
It
I
can
was
happen.
glad that I was around people that volunteer. A lot of people say bring back the draft. I don't believe in that, because you don't want us, given the technologically heavy, technology heavy military that we're in now. A draft would be impractical because it takes years of training to get somebody up to a level. It's not like back in the day where they just send you through 3 weeks of boot camp, give you a rifle, and go to it. I don't ever think a war will ever come to that, God forbid. But I never say never. But I think modern warfare, it's outside of those. It's so, a draft wouldn't be practical. I was glad I was around people that volunteered to not only join, but to be in the unit that I was in, because it took a certain level of selection of some people call it hazing, or a certain level of motivation and want and drive to be in that unit, because it was an elite unit. They considered the varsity team of the Army. I mean, by no means were we Rangers or Special Operations. We had our own mission set, but for that mission set, we were the ones that the president dialed 911. That's who he got when he dialed 911, when the balloon went up. He got us, because we were a rapid response force that was able to bring the fight to the enemy. And go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask that brings to mind another question. We often think of infantry as, these guys with a rifle walking around the countryside. You see World War II movies, especially, and it sort of influences that, or Vietnam movies, even to a degree. You just got a patrol of guys walking around in the jungle. It looks kind of random in a movie or something, but it's obviously not. And that leads me to my question, actually, which is that you guys are not just cannon fodder.
No. I mean, that way of thinking went by the wayside in the 70s when the Army reverted to an all-volunteer force. They started professionalizing the MCO Corps, which there's certain levels of leadership education that an enlisted man has to go through to earn his stripes. And you got to be tactically and doctrinally sound. You got to prove that you can lead troops. I mean, that kind of mentality for infantry troops went to the wayside in the 70s when Colin Powell was the chief of staff, actually, and he initiated an all-volunteer force and started professionalizing the volunteers. And we believe in a policy of quality over quantity. That's what differentiates the Western forces. You have a $1 million soldier versus like China that will field $1 million $3 soldiers. You know what I mean?
Right. Where do you think we stand internationally in terms of a force? We are so scattered. I mean, we have bases all over the place. We've got this
Yeah.
huge command. We have the largest military budget on the planet by far. Not even nobody even comes remotely close. Do
Yeah.
you think this is money from that's being well spent?
I think so, because you got to look at it. I mean, our GDP is so large. We spend only 12% of our GDP, I think, if that, on our military. But our GDP is so large. We're such a wealthy country that 12% can buy you a lot. Unlike Russia, that's like 50% of their GDP, and they still have crappy equipment. You know what I mean? And a large force to field, supply, feed, train, and equip. So um, the I think the biggest bang for your buck, though, is to give the impression to any enemy overseas that it's what you're going to go up against is going to be, not to sound arrogant, but it's going to be your worst nightmare. Like that recent Medal of Honor recipient said, we as soldiers must be professional enough to give the impression to our future enemy that if you go to war with us, somebody else is going to raise your children. That's the impression, that it's a deterrent. So if they see us constantly, the enemy intelligence is always out there snooping and pooping. If they're doing assessments and they're thinking, hey, look, the Americans are always ready. These guys are constantly trained. They're well equipped. They're well fed. I mean, it would be a serious disaster to go up against us. Now, some will try, because you have dictators that are fanatical. Some will try, but I think on the whole that I think we're in a pretty good position because we provide a bit. Now what emboldens the enemy, I think, is in this age of constant communications, they witness the discourse among our population that they don't have in their own countries. So that I think would embolden them more than assessing the fighting readiness of the U.S. military.
Makes total sense and
Which
leads
would be
right.
a drastic mistake because
No, I get it. I definitely get it. Well, that's good because it leads, your answer there leads me exactly where I wanted to go next, and that is back here to the United States. We are a divided nation right now, perhaps more so than we have been in a very long time, at least when you look at the illusionary world of social media and cable news networks and that sort of thing. And I say illusionary because we need to be very, very clear on the fact that that is a world that exists in cyberspace. It's not the real world.
No.
So I want to differentiate those two things because I don't want to get into fear mongering or something like that. I want to be realistic in our assessments, but I have questions again from a military perspective, having gone over there, having seen everything that you have seen, direct eyeballs on, boots on the ground, et cetera, at multiple locations, at multiple levels over a long period of time. In a general sense, how do you see, where do you think the civilian population that weighs in on this stuff back home now and where we've come to now, where do you see that we get it right and we get it wrong?
Well, I think maybe a year or two ago, I had, it was a thread I think Jeff Hawkins had made on a comment that we were all commenting on. And I had made the comment like, man, I wish I wish for the days that politics was civil, kind of like as a joke. You know what I mean? Like, I know it's never been really civil. And Jeff Hawkins said, when was that? Not being mean or anything, but he was just saying, when was that? And I was trying to point out a time where even though there was divisiveness, there was still some type of professional courtesy there. In that own sick world of politics, there was still some professional courtesy in there somewhere. I think that's the major difference. But as a history student, I look to the examples this country has had over the years in war and out of war. During the Revolution, we were divided. Civil War, God knows. I mean, that's the definition of division. Vietnam, there's a storm. I mean, we have been a divided population. That's in our DNA. If we wasn't divided, I would be worried. You know what I mean? Discourse is needed. Public discourse, transparent discourse is needed. because as a soldier like myself, who is sworn to follow the orders of the officers appointed over me, if I'm sent somewhere to accomplish the mission and I ended up being hoodwinked, I want somebody, a civilian, to be confident enough that he can cause enough, or she can cause enough ruckus to have that political decision reversed and get me back home. Because if I left on my own, I would be abandoning my unit and be considered AWOL and a traitor. You know what I mean? So that kind of
Absolutely.
discourse is needed. It keeps things in balance. I don't think it's any different. It's just more prevalent now because we have social media, but I don't think it's any different than what was experienced relative to those people during the times of the Civil War, the Revolution, every major um, um, historical event that caused some type of division. I don't think it's any different than that.
Well, that is a great comment on that. That's really great. And I think this is why you and I see eye to eye more often than we don't on stuff, even though you and I come from very different places.
Yeah. But then again, kind of the same, man.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of questions I asked you in the beginning on your show was about your uniform and about your lifestyle when you were in the Sea Org, because I wanted to know, because you had actually, like in about 2014, I had reached my 20-year mark. I had the option of getting out. I chose otherwise and stayed in, but I was going through some PTSD issues, man. I mean, I've seen a lot of shit. I lost a lot of friends, and I deal with that. And I came across Scientology, man, on their website, and they were saying, I called the number, and they were telling me what I wanted to hear, man. And they were like, oh, man, there's a paramilitary organization like you did, something that wouldn't be unfamiliar to you. You get your mind right. We could use you, you can use your talent. And I had my bags packed, man. I was ready to go. And then I said, you know what? I got to dig into this a little bit more. And I stumbled on your site. And I was like, oh, fuck that. Oh, no. Oh, no.
Oh, well, I'm really glad you did. Yeah. Because
that video you did on Scientology's coming apart at the seams did it. I was like, oh, no. Oh, hell no. Nope. I mean, and the more I stuck with it and learned, I was like, oh, my God, man, that is the opposite of what, God knows how many people call for wanting some true help, and they fall for that. And then they get sucked in. And now you think your life was ruined before. Jesus.
Yeah, right. And, and this PTSD thing ain't no joke. I mean, you've experienced it. I mean, I've experienced it on my own thing, but my level of it is very, very different from yours.
I would beg to differ, because PTSD, I've learned, it's not about what's wrong with you. It's about what happened to you. You could get PTSD from childbirth or a car accident. It's relative to the individual that experienced it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, good point.
It's for me to say that what you've been through, what causes you to stay up at night is irrelevant or shouldn't be considered on par with this. No, man. No. No. It's trauma. And it's something that altered your life that you live with. And regardless of the severity or the kind, it's still the same thing. The result is the same. You're fucked up. And that's you know what I mean?
That's where it goes. That's right. How have you dealt with it, and how have you seen your fellows deal with it?
Unfortunately, I lost some friends of mine to suicide. There's 22 veterans a day that commit suicide since the war. And that is a conundrum in itself, because this is the first time a battle-hardened veteran force of committing suicide at this kind of rate, because you didn't have that from on this level from the Vietnam vets and World War II. So they're still trying to work on that and figure that out and see what can fix that, if there is a way. But those that I've seen deal with it, I mean, some of them I've seen go off on drug tangents, alcohol. I mean, I've got 2 ex-wives, Chris. I mean, it's because I was being unable to be dealt with. I had shit on my mind. You know what I mean? If I wasn't training to go to war, I was coming back from war, or I was in war. You know what I mean? That cycle of life is no way to live. So that's another reason why I got off active duty. Things happen, but I've seen, like I said, some commit suicide, but then I've seen some that have really excelled, used it to their benefit, got out of it and said, I'm going to use what I learned to appreciate what I have now, and I think that's the best best way to deal with it. You know, I
Yeah.
don't think medication is the answer. Maybe I don't know. You know, but it's all relative to the individual experiencing it. You know.
Oh, of course, of course. How has the VA, or you hear my only experience again with the VA is reading news stories about how awful it
Yeah.
is and this sort of thing. But
It is, and if I have to blame any political leadership in the past for anything, it would be the welfare of the veterans coming home, because that has been such a shit show. I mean, I hear stories of veterans that lost limbs, that the unprofessional staff they take him to give him a bath. They forget about him. He ends up drowning in the tub. I hear the executives buying crazy stuff with bonuses and government money. It's a shit show. I know that if I need to get treated, I'm on a waiting list, and that shouldn't be. You know, I'm on a waiting list that can last up to 2-3 weeks long. You know, that's ridiculous. You know, um, they have the bedside manner of the IRS and the efficiency of the post office. You know, it's it's
I
it's
don't want to
crazy.
laugh at that, but
Yeah,
yeah,
but it's a reality, man. Yeah.
yeah, shit. Are there outside resources that you've been able to take advantage of, or that you've heard
There
about?
are some veterans organizations that have um, uh, sprung up over the years that have been like points of channeling for veterans to get them in the right direction in an expedited way. You know, to they have petitioned government officials for legislation to be passed to have civilian doctors be paid for on the government dime or out of the VA budget. You know, if they're not going to do it, well, let's see if they can't get some civilian doctors in their local area to do it. You know what I mean? Thank God for that. But just those little things, you got to be resourced, and a veteran has to really, he's got to want to help himself too. He's got to remember those fundamental building blocks. Look, I'm gonna get out of this shit sandwich I'm in. I need to suck it up. I need to take one step at a time. Hit that alarm clock in my head that's going off, telling me to sit down and not do anything. Hit that alarm clock, get on my feet, and continue to march.
Right. And that is the struggle. That really is the struggle. There is a perception, and certainly one that I have witnessed firsthand, of the you just mentioned suck it up.
Yeah.
Good advice under some circumstances, and
Exactly. Yeah.
horrible advice under other circumstances.
Exactly.
Right?
Like I said, it's individual dependent.
Yeah.
That term, I mean, when I was first joining the Army, suck it up was like used every 10 minutes. You know, here's some Motrin, drink water, take a knee. I know your spine is compressed because you're carrying 90 pounds for 15 miles, but suck it up. You know, suck it. And now that culture I've seen has changed, because those injuries that these veterans are coming home with are injuries that could have been averted if their chain of command was properly briefed on, look, you do this dumb shit in training, you're gonna hurt a soldier, or you're telling them to do this. This is not wise, man. This is dumb. You know, there's a fine line between being what we call hua and crazy. You know what I mean?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's having that leadership, your chain of command, aware of that difference. You know, saying, look, I need to push you hard. I need to get everything out of you, because training, every drop of sweat in training saves a gallon of blood. I get it, but then there comes a point to where, look, man, you got to stop. Stop. It's 105 degrees with 200% humidity. You're wearing 6 layers of body armor. You got to stop, dude.
Yeah, exactly.
What good are you?
Of course, you hear the stories about, and everybody exemplifies and practically idolizes special forces, Green Beret, the elite units.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they lose sight of just how tough just being in the regular units is.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the expected standard, like I was in an airborne unit, so the standards are pretty high. And that is the bottom tier of, the next level up would be Rangers, then would be your Green Berets, and then what we have, what you call going to the dark side, the Delta Force guys, the unmentionables. That's the level of, I guess, Hollywoodness. But you escalate as you choose to take in your Army career. But you hear a lot of like Navy SEALs, they love the TV, man. those guys, there's a movie or a book made every other week about those dudes, man. And it's like,
Yep.
man, you're supposed to, silent professionals, man. Like, what the hell? Get off the TV, man.
Right. Right.
You know?
Yeah, they're not so special when everybody knows everything about them.
Yeah. So, but I mean, yeah. Being in what I can speak to, being in an airborne unit. I mean, it was physically demanding for me. I mean, I played sports in high school. I'm by no means some kind of super machine, because some of those guys that make it up to those levels of special operations are machines. Like, you wondering when they're going to take the batteries out, because they can just go and go and carry a god amount of weight, and it's just, man, what you wouldn't think would be humanly possible. But I guess that's why I never went for that kind of thing, because I'm not made that way. But I mean, it was hard. It was challenging for me. It kept me in shape. It kept me mentally focused. But that's why when you go to those higher levels of special operations, each level you go up to, the standard gets a little bit harder, because they want to find the better person. Not to say that you're not a good person, but the better person that'll fit that kind of culture, that'll physically handle it. All the way up to, like, let's say Delta Force, for example, where, from what I understand, I mean, I've never been through the training, but I had guys that went through the selection process and flunked. It's a solitary exercise. They're by themselves. They carry god awful amounts of weight on their back. They're given a map and say, look, you got to walk this 30 miles to get to this point no later by this time, and see you there. And then halfway there, some dude jumps out of the bushes and says, stop right there. You're going to get X-filled. You're not what we're looking for. Thanks for trying. See you later. You know what I mean? That takes a mental fortitude that a lot of people don't have.
Yeah, I'll say. Yeah, it's yeah, and I don't mean to denigrate these guys at all when I say the
Oh,
special
no,
forces
not
aren't
at all.
special,
They are the epitome of, because they do that special type of work. To the average soldier, to paratroopers like myself, we idolize those dudes. You'll see them walking around on post, with the beards and the Metro tactical look with the collar top, and you're like, whoa, those are the Hollywood guys.
Right, right.
I don't want to
Right.
be asked if they were here, because I won't be able to say it.
Yeah, exactly. But we got to be clear that there is no, there's no skimming by in the armed forces. You get in there.
No.
No,
Yeah.
you're going to be working.
I mean, every job is important. Every job is unique. Every job has their standards. And regardless of what you volunteer for, if you don't meet that standard for what you volunteered for, you won't be doing it for long. Because in an all-volunteer force where they offer bonuses and they recruit the best and the brightest and the most physically fit, they have a multitude of people to choose from. They don't need you. And they'll tell you that. You need us. You asked. Nobody twisted your arm to sign up. I got told that all the time when I was in airborne school. Oh, what, you hurt? No, nobody twisted your arm to be here. You want to quit? They get in your head. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. But that's exactly how they should do it, because they do need the best and the brightest at the top, and that's what we want.
Yeah.
And that's not a selection process that occurs by, asking people how they feel about stuff. You gotta earn it.
Right. You're right.
So, 100% behind that. And for that purpose, for that activity, that makes complete sense. I would never take that standard and then apply it to some other zone where it doesn't make any sense.
Exactly. I mean, and plus, while you're going through that, let's say you make it and you get to your unit. Let's say you go through Ranger Indoctrination Program, they call it RIP, and you get to our Ranger battalion. I mean, that's the elite of the infantry, of the paratroopers. That's the Rangers, man. The first thing you get briefed on is what is expected of you. Okay, you made it through all that dumb shit. Now, don't forget that you are an American soldier, expected to behave a certain way, that you have guidelines. Don't forget why you're here, because we'll remind you the minute you don't.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting. Quite a different culture. And I think civilian population, certainly myself, can forget, in our criticisms and our looking at the consequences of actions, we can often forget that we are dealing with, extremely good people who are really dedicating their lives to something that they see as a very positive and good thing to be doing,
Yeah.
And in many, many, many ways, they are right. So I just, this is why I, always thank people for their service, because it's something
Well,
to be
thank you.
thankful for.
Yeah, and I wish a lot of people felt like you, man. And I can only imagine what the Vietnam vets have gone through. Like
Oh,
my dad, man.
oh,
My dad would tell me stories about having to change out of his uniform uh, in the middle of the night while he was at a Seattle airport because there were protesters that were there ready to throw bags of dog shit on him. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
exactly.
Especially when in a culture where you're drafted and it's not your fault. You didn't ask to go, but you're doing your duty. You've been asked to go. You got drafted, and well, I'm going to go do my duty because that's what you were taught.
That's right. That's exactly right. And
Because
there's
if you
layer
don't, who
after
will?
layer after layer of it, so
Yeah,
and deconstructing some of that stuff can be very, very helpful, when it
yeah,
becomes a bit too much. But you definitely have to recognize that there are sectors of our society where you have to push people in certain directions in order to get them to operate at all. And I think we've made that point, and
yep.
I think it's a good point that needs to be made. Do you have any comments? And it's okay with me if you don't, but I'm kind of wondering, do you have any comments about how our current political situation? I mean, we have a person in office who arguably is difficult person,
Yes,
and is challenged by the truth, is challenged in telling the truth about things.
yeah,
Um, I have many, many issues with such a personality,
yeah,
because I've lived under it, and I know
yeah,
what it is like, and I know what they're capable of, and it frankly kind of scares me a bit that you put somebody like that in charge of the nuclear codes, or in charge of thousands and thousands of people who are
yeah,
$1 million soldiers.
yeah.
What is the view from inside, from your perspective, on
A couple
that
things.
situation?
First, with Donald Trump being my commander in chief, the fountain of all awards and my paycheck, I am obliged by oath to lawfully follow with fidelity his orders, command, and intentions. But in the same breath, as you were asking, on a soldier level, it's mixed. Um, like I know he can be vile. He could be, he could be so bombastic. He could be so boisterous. He reminds me like a Teddy Roosevelt, bully pulpit kind of in your face, rich guy trying to, But I watched a video on Eric Snowden not too long ago, and he gave the perfect description of Donald Trump. He's a rich guy that is used to getting what he wants, and and even love. So he'll do whatever it takes from a personal perspective or on a political perspective to get that love. He'll say whatever needs to be said to maintain it,
Exactly.
and that's kind of almost a sad way to live. But in the same breath, he's occupying that office. I've got my fingers crossed that he's going to make the best decision. So far, he's done a lot for the military. He's built us back up. Released the funding, allowed the training, but you just hope. You sit back and hope, like, man, I hope that next decision you make is a good one, because it's going to take
Right.
one guy to call your bluff, dude, and then we're in a shitstorm.
Exactly. And of course that keeps me up at night as well. Um, Maybe we can set a lot of people's minds at ease right now. There are obviously guidelines and rules that are very, very strict and very, very known,
Mm-hmm.
that the military cannot just be operating with impunity on American soil against American
Yeah,
citizens, right?
yeah,
And nobody has the idea, well, I should say, hopefully few people have the idea or are truly terrified that Trump might, or somebody, anybody actually, because this goes beyond just the questions of our current president.
mm-hmm.
In looking at the big picture here, when is the military, or when are individuals in the military obligated to question the orders that they are given? And, what are the
Every time you've
circumstances?
given one, you're taught
Really?
to have you're taught to have a what they call a MDMP, military decision making process. You're giving an order, and you are bound to use that thought process to analyze the validity of that order. So that's why orders that are given to me are so vague, because it's up to me to find out what my piece of the pie is. Is it effective? Is it legal? Would it be an unnecessary waste of resources and personnel? Would it be fraud, give the appearance of fraud, waste, and abuse? That military decision-making process goes into every order I'm given because that's just what we're taught. So, I mean, on a cataclysmic scale, I guess you could say, if there was some type of, madman, I mean, Trump went really off the deep end and he tried to order the military to do something crazy. I mean, the generals are obliged to say, no. Our allegiance first is to the Congress, to the Constitution, then to the Congress. We're lawfully obligated to carry out your orders, but this is stupid. Sorry.
Right. Okay. I suspect that there have been many such conversations already.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure as well. Because,
but hidden in all that is Trump's display of his intention of not to want to go and get into a fight. That's the one good thing I can say that he's been pretty solid on. He's avoiding, if that Iran thing happened with Bush, I mean, we would be in Tehran by now. So
yeah, that's a good point.
You know what I mean?
Yes,
so,
that is a good point.
Trump is very adamant about keeping us out of conflict. And if conflict happens, it's going to have something that has a lot of closing distance. We're going to use drones and missiles, something that you could just see on a TV. He don't want to have that campaign promise broken, to lose that love by putting boots on the ground,
Right. How would that affect? I've never really thought about it much before. How does that sort of order affect things politically for soldiers?
I mean, it happens when we're given orders to, let's say, go fight. I mean, we're not, the time to think about the politics is after it's done.
Right.
You're given a mission and you got your world to consolidate and get ready to go fight. You got loved ones that are going to miss you. You got a dog you got to find a sitter for. You got bill collectors that you got to call and say, hey, look, I'm going to be gone. Those are the things that take priority when the balloon goes up, so to speak. That's what takes precedence, because it's not like, I mean, I know it can be kind of, Hollywood has a different perspective of it. Even in some of the most realistic movies, they try to put this philosophical spin on it, or this political spin on it, when in actuality, it's not. Maybe some of them had that consideration, but I know that that never crossed my mind. I'm not thinking about the politics. I got unqualified belief and faith in my chain of command that they know what they're doing. So if they give me an order, well, then it's time for me to execute. I'm not going to sit down there and dance around it.
Makes total sense. Listen, man, I think we're going to head toward wrapping up. This has been an amazing conversation.
Yeah, man. And I completely enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking the time. I really, really appreciate it. Your perspective is unique and valuable, and not something that I could ever assume or presume to just, get my head in your headspace and speak from your position. I just can't do that. So I very much appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, man. And I appreciate you having me on. It was a good talk, man. Finally got to talk to you. Finally got to meet you. And hope there's many more, man.
Exactly. Well, this definitely doesn't have to be our last one. This is just our first, right? And I love collecting resources for my show and bringing them back on to, to talk about specific things. So I'm sure we do this again.
I don't think we're going to be short of incidents to talk about in the near future. If you know what I mean.
I don't think so either, man. So, all right. Well, Gary, thanks a lot, man. Any questions, comments, feedback you guys have out there on this, I would be very happy to hear it. I hope you guys have enjoyed this show and considered many of the things that we talked about here in maybe a different light than the way you've considered it before. This was no effort to change anybody's mind in one direction or another, but it was really just an effort to throw some more information out there for you to use to consider the pros and cons of some of the decision-making processes that go on behind the scenes. For when we see headlines of things and we become outraged, well, maybe there's more to that story that you really don't have any clue about, and maybe this could help give you some. So thanks for listening, folks, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.